Mark Seward.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I start by saying what a privilege it is to follow the incredible speeches that we've heard across the House today. It has been especially powerful hearing the testimonies of people that have come and descended from the families of Holocaust survivors. And I do want to pay tribute to several members before I begin the substance of my speech today. First of all, the member for Hendon, who has been referenced countless times, and rightly so. His family history is a powerful reminder, and I am absolutely certain that his family will be proud of him because he got to come to this place on these benches and share his story, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. In exactly the same vein, the member for Leeds Central and Headingley gave such a powerful account. Now, he and I have known each other for many, many years. Before either of us made it to this house. He got here in 2017, so he is a veteran by most standards. I've been here for 6 months. But I have never heard him speak in that way about his family history before. And it was such a privilege to be here as he did so. And I thank him for that. Thank him for that. We've heard other great speeches too, and I do want to pay special thanks to the member for Harrow East. He set out in great detail the opportunities that were potentially missed to prevent the Holocaust, or at least mitigate some of its impacts. I have often wondered, despite studying history, I have often wondered what could have been done to prevent this catastrophe from ever taking place. And I really appreciate his insight into what the Allies could have done sooner to prevent it from happening. The member for Bury St Edmunds and Stowmarket, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, gave an excellent short contribution, and I am so proud that he is the first Labour MP to represent that constituency in this House. He has given many, many good contributions, and I've found listening to him particularly powerful in today's debates, but also in other debates too. And of course, the member for Eastleigh talked about Portcullis House and the ceremony that we attended yesterday. It was especially powerful to hear from Yisrael and Alfred, the two Holocaust survivors, because as the member stated, and as many members have stated in the House today, the window to speak to survivors, to hear their first-hand testimony, is shrinking. So I am especially grateful to Mr. Speaker and his office for arranging that. The member for High Peak, my honourable friend, set out exactly why we need to be vigilant to the terror of anti-Semitism, to the spectre of anti-Semitism that haunts Britain's streets today. He spoke far more powerfully than I can and summed up the issues much, much more succinctly than I could. But we know today in Britain's streets that Jewish people are less safe than they were before October the 7th. That cannot be right, and I thank him for his contributions and for highlighting that. I also thank the honourable member for Rochdale, my honourable friend. His speech was incredibly powerful, and I always enjoy listening to his testimony, especially since he was a former newspaper column writer, and that certainly came through in the words that he wrote for his contribution today, and I thank him for that. Madam Deputy Speaker, Monday, the 27th of January, will mark a sombre day of reflection and remembrance. 80 years after the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, this year's Holocaust Memorial Day is an important anniversary that we must all observe. Now, in November, I had the privilege of joining the European Jewish Association on their delegation to Auschwitz and Krakow. Now, in Krakow, we talked about the spectre of anti-Semitism and what needs to be done to prevent it and to prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. And for my part, I talked about my experience as a maths teacher in a secondary school before I made it to this place, and the role that I thought Holocaust education had to play in preventing such tragedies in the future. However, the most important part of the visit was our visit to Auschwitz and Auschwitz-Birkenau. We laid wreaths and we paid tributes to the millions of victims of the Holocaust. Now, to stand in that place where human beings committed the most evil acts imaginable was a harrowing experience. I cannot share all of the details today, but something struck me while I was there. I was standing in the field just past the gates of Auschwitz-Birkenau, and I was stunned by the scale and the size of the camp. I had never imagined it being as large as it was. Murder on an industrial scale. Now, most of the accommodation that was built for the camp's inhabitants, and of course I use that word accommodation knowing it does no justice to the terrible conditions that people were kept in, but most of it was made of wood, and so it's long since perished. However, the chimneys of the accommodation were built from bricks, and they still stand, and I was taken aback by an enormous field of chimneys stretching as far as I could see. The worst of humanity on display for all. But it is so important that that camp stands as a lesson and stands in history forever, so that all of us can learn about the horrors of the Holocaust. It will stay with me forever. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, while liberation brought an end to the horrors of Nazi extermination and torture, it did come too late for 6 million Jewish people and all of the other victims of the Holocaust. We owe it to all of them to ensure that never again means never again. Now, some of the people who have survived Auschwitz and the Holocaust have shared their stories with us, and I referenced some of them earlier. Powerful lessons can always be learned from these testimonies. I'd like to pay tribute to one of those survivors today. Ibi Nil was a Leeds resident for most of her life following World War II. However, in her youth, Ibi fled to Hungary to escape Nazi-occupied Czechoslovakia. But sadly, she was still captured and she was still deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Now, with your permission, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to read a little bit of Ibi's testimony today. And please understand that any reference to you is just taken from her testimony. This is what she wrote after she arriving at Auschwitz-Birkenau. When we arrived, men in striped pyjamas opened the doors and told us to leave the sick, the old, and the children. Men and women were separated. I and 4 other women, 2 of them doctors, linked arms and moved past the doctor. We had arrived in Auschwitz-Birkenau. We were told to strip, had the hair shaved off all of our bodies, and then pushed into the showers. Normal practice included, at this stage, the registration and tattooing of each person's identity number on their left arm. But there were so many of us that the ink ran out, and I was not tattooed. We were given some clothes and taken into the camp. 250 women went into each hut. The people in charge of my hut were Czech, so I could speak to them and got a slightly larger ration of watery soup and a slightly larger piece of blanket. There was so little room that we had to sleep squashed up like spoons. Every morning, midday and evening, everyone was counted, and this could take 3 or 4 hours. You had to strip and hold your clothes above your head. If you swayed or stumbled, you were taken away and never seen again. We were taken to be showered once a week. If anyone was taken ill, they were taken to the hospital hut and then usually to the gas chambers. Worse than hunger was the thirst, and in summer there was no water at all. On the 26th of July, the doctor asked for volunteers. I, with 2 doctors and 2 nurses who had come together to Auschwitz, had realised that if we stayed there, we would die. We therefore volunteered and went with a slave labour transport of 530 Hungarian women to Germany. We spent overnight in another hutment where a twin I knew, from Czechoslovakia, asked me to tell the world what I had seen, because she was being experimented on as part of the twins by a doctor, and they did not believe they would survive. We left Auschwitz-Birkenau on the 27th of July. Her testimony is incredibly powerful. She knew that if she died in that camp, if she stayed in that camp, she would die. So she took the opportunity to go to Germany, an opportunity that few had, until she was liberated while on a death march on Easter Sunday, 1945. Now, Ibby married and came to England and lived in Leeds, and she was later supported by the Holocaust Survivors Friendship Association, based in Leeds. They now run Holocaust Centre North, which is a museum in Huddersfield devoted to telling a global history of the Holocaust through the local stories of survivors and refugees like Ibby. Now, Ibby spent the remainder of her later life telling that story that I've shared with you now. She wanted to educate future generations about the horrors of the Holocaust, and I pay tribute to Ibby and all of the survivors. They have given their accounts so that we can learn the lessons and ensure that it never happens again. Now, members have already spoken about the theme for this Holocaust Memorial Day, and it is all about taking action for a better future. Now, given the rise in anti-Semitism in the UK and across Europe, we have to prioritise action to stop this evil. My honourable member, the member for High Peak, my honourable friend, the member for High Peak, already set this out in very clear terms. I welcome that the government has allocated £54 million for the Community Security Trust to continue their vital work in protecting the Jewish community. I also welcome that the Prime Minister took the opportunity at PMQs a few weeks ago to reiterate his commitment to this money. I also think that education is key here as well. As a former teacher, I know the power that education has to inspire understanding. The Holocaust must never become a footnote in history, especially as we approach that era that I spoke about, where we will no longer be able to hear survivors provide their testimony in person. And so to that end, I want to put my gratitude, on record my gratitude, to the Holocaust Education Trust, who do an incredible amount to educate teachers and provide high-quality material to schools. I'm also pleased that the government has continued the cross-party consensus that exists in the need to properly support and fund Holocaust education. We have pledged an additional £2 million to support the Holocaust Educational Trust and their crucial work. We are also committed to building a new Holocaust Memorial and Learning Centre. And I welcome that the Holocaust education itself will remain mandatory on the national curriculum. And on that point, I do want to speak about the trials that are going ahead on Holocaust education in some schools to see how we can further expand it. We need to ensure that it's not just embedded in the curriculum, that it stays with our young people beyond school. While I was in Poland for that visit, I spoke with a journalist, a young man from Gildersham in my constituency, and he was asking me about the post office that was under threat. But I told him where I was, and he said, "Oh yes, no, the Holocaust, well, we had a few lessons on that in school, but not much more." And that struck a chord with me, that struck a note, because if he's saying that, and this was somebody who was switched on, interested in politics, becoming a journalist, then there are bound to be other students who could be left behind. And that's why it's so important that these trials that are going on at the moment are used, and then, if they are successful, rolled out to the national curriculum much more widely. We all must continue to learn the lessons from humanity's darkest time. Now, before I conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I do want to pay tribute to the Leeds Jewish community for the events they always organise across Leeds for Holocaust Memorial Day. So this Sunday, we will see the Civic Remembrance event at City Varieties, an event I've attended before. It will remember those murdered in the Holocaust, as well as subsequent genocides in Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia and Darfur, and I'm very pleased to hear those genocides referenced in the House today across all parties. There will be readings and candles lit by representatives of all those who were persecuted, including Holocaust survivors. we will come together as a city to remember those we lost, as we always do every year, and we always will. Now, all of us in this house have a duty to use our voices to uphold the memory of the Holocaust, its victims and its survivors. We owe it to everyone who died. We will never forget them. The words "never again" will stand for all time. And I know that everyone in this house will work towards that end. Thank you.